So in the end, all I can really add is what Kisame has already told you. Besides Leader-sama, I doubt anyone here could go toe-to-toe with her in her superior form. Even without, she's not to be taken lightly. Also, do not underestimate her team. Haruno's lists of achievements are noteworthy. However circumstantial those small victories were, she got them over Itachi of all people, twice now. And now she was able to fool even my senses. Whereas Uzumaki is like a hurricane, a massive amount of force that sweeps aside all opposition. Haruno seems like a very poisonous wasp. Easy to sweep aside, but has the potential to kill you if you don't see it coming. An apt comparison from what little we've seen, Itachi added. Uzumaki is very loud and flashy. She casts a large shadow, and Haruno makes excellent use of hiding within and striking from inside that shadow. Neither Kunoichi would be half as dangerous if the other wasn't there. Konoha did always pride itself on its teamwork, Pain said. Regardless, all of you are to avoid the Nine-Tails and Shuriki from now on. This seemed to disappoint a lot of them. When the time comes, I will personally deal with her. For now, all of you are to focus on our other objectives. And will I be going solo from now on? I wouldn't mind, Sasori said. No, a replacement has already been prepared for you. Really? Who? Sasori was interrupted as someone suddenly hugged him from behind. He hadn't even sensed anyone approach. He was immediately let go, and Sasori now looked at a man with an orange mask. He grabbed Sasori's hand and started to enthusiastically shake it. Sasori sir, it's such an incredible honor to meet you. I'm new, but don't worry. Toby is a good boy. I won't slow you down, I swear. Sasori turned his head to look at Pain's silhouette, his expression conveying the question, are you serious? You all have your assignments. Dismissed. So what's the first on our agenda, Mr. Sasori, sir? Sasori withheld a sigh. He was going to end up missing Deidara, he could tell. I've got a meeting with one of my spies in 8 days. Before that, I want to spend some time on repairing some of the damage my puppet sustained in the last fight. I nearly forgot. I made sure to bring this. Wanted to make a good first impression, of course. And Toby brought out a sword scroll and brought out what seemed like the broken pieces of every puppet Sasori had lost in the last fight. The Hiroko puppet chief among them. Sasori smiled genuinely. He had worried that the Sand Village would retrieve those pieces before he got the chance. You're a good boy indeed, Toby. Okay, yes, we all know this is actually Obito. This is just him when he was still pretending to be a goofball and basically just trolling everybody. After about 5 days, they headed out towards the land of grass. I didn't know there was a Jinchuriki in this country, Toby said, looking around himself in a mimicry of childlike wonder. There isn't. I've been tasked with keeping tabs on Orochimaru, a traitor from our organization. Toby gasped. A traitor? So he's like a bad man? Not for the first time these past few days. Sasori wondered if this Toby was mocking him, or if he was really this ridiculous. Spoiler, it's the former. A bad man, yes, Sasori said in his best deadpan. More importantly, he's a wildcard that the Akatsuki can well do without. If he obtains the body of Sasuke Uchiha, he might gain the strength to challenge us. And a man as greedy as he would no doubt want a piece of the Bijuu's power for himself if he grows strong enough to no longer fear us. I have been tasked to keep an eye on him, hence our current destination. Toby cowered. He sounds scary. He is, Sasori again deadpanned. If everything goes according to plan, you won't need to fight him. But one should always be prepared. Well, best not keep your spy waiting then. That's the spirit. Another 4 days later, Sasori went to meet Kabuto at the Tenshi Bridge. Sasori had asked Toby what his specialties were, and his answer had been, not getting caught. The puppet master had taken that to mean that he was good at stealth and evasion tactics, so he had put the young man on lookout. So Sasori went to meet Kabuto in the Hiroko puppet and, well, things almost instantly deteriorate into violence. Sasori had sealed part of Kabuto's memories away, so he didn't know he first worked for Orochimaru. That's the thing that keeps Kabuto loyal to him. If he can do that, I imagine that one of the first things Sasori checks for is whether that seal on his memories is still working. A memory modification jutsu like that, which is in essence I think a really powerful genjutsu, would require him to have his target completely at his mercy first, cause I don't think he can just brainwash somebody during combat. Now remember, in part 1, Kabuto's legs got torn apart by the BFF Rasengan. Sasori has by now built his agent a pair of prosthetic legs so he could remain useful to him. They were almost as good as normal legs, and in Sasori's mind they were even superior. But as Sasori had made them, he also knew how to disable them with a simple tug of a chakra string. "Lord Sasori!" Kabuto cried out with a betrayed expression as his legs failed him. "Have no fear, Yakushi-kun. If you are loyal, you won't remember the next few minutes. If not, well, I did recently lose a few human puppets and have been looking to replace them." "Hey Sasori-san! Orochimaru is here!" Tobi yelled, and Sasori jumped back to avoid several snakes which converged on his position. He was dragging Kabuto with his now paralyzed prosthetic legs with him. "Could you take care of that?" Sasori sounded annoyed as he responded. "Couldn't you have tried to attack him yourself before announcing you were there?" Tobi looked contrite. "Sorry, was I supposed to?" "Standards have gone down, I see," Orochimaru said with a grin. "Hey!" came Tobi's outraged yell. "Just try and find and scout their base while I keep our main threats occupied. Surely you can do that much." "On it, Sasori, sir!" Tobi said enthusiastically and ran off. "If he's as incompetent as he seems, he'll have trouble if he encounters my Sasuke." "Really? You judge him strong enough to face one of our ranks?" Sasori asked. "I've invested a lot of effort into him." "Well, I'm honestly surprised. It's very unlike you." "Oh? You know me so well, do you?" "Intelligence is part of my trait, and there is a pattern to your behavior. You hate being surrounded by equals." Orochimaru's smile dimmed at that analysis. "You did not have to leave after you failed to kill Itachi. Pain-sama recognized your talent and wouldn't discard you for such an offense. Nor would Itachi take vengeance against you. To him, you're like an angry peasant, smashing your feet against his castle and breaking your toe. You don't punish someone like that, you laugh at them instead." The hostility in the air increased further. "Instead you left, and surrounded yourself and working with lesser ninja, allowing you to feel superior. You see it in your targets as well. Mostly go after low-risk targets, getting tuning civilians, children, and even infants." "Power isn't always a good indicator for how valuable a subject is long-term," Orochimaru shrugged. "Perhaps so, but it has worked out well for you. By always working with and targeting those below your weight class, you've obtained a fearsome reputation as one of the most powerful people on the planet. It's an effective intimidation tactic and I applaud it." "You think I'm overhyped, do you?" "Every time you deviated from this pattern, you paid for it. Itachi humiliated you, and Saraitobi robbed you of the use of your arms and jutsus." "Well, there is no point in disagreeing. You're about to find out the truth firsthand." Orochimaru opened his mouth unnaturally wide and a sea of snakes launched forward. At the same time, iron sand began to swirl around Sasori, and a second later the forest exploded into violence. Back at Orochimaru's hideout, Sasuke was resting after a long day of training. Though most observers would say that Sasuke was enjoying something much more enviable than mere rest. He was shirtless and lying on his stomach on a bed. Sitting at the base of his torso was Hinata, She had her Byakugan active and was carefully applying a version of the gentle fist that was more true to its name. In Hinata's quest to find more casual uses for her ninja arts, she had discovered that her clan's techniques could easily be applied to becoming one of the best masseuses in the land. Sasuke was only too eager to take advantage of this. If this is her trying to seduce me into keeping her after Itachi, she is succeeding, Sasuke thought to himself. Hinata hadn't stopped hinting that she wanted something more between them. Like a slow stream of advances and teases to tear at his resolve to keep her at a distance until he had dealt with Itachi. And damn if it wasn't effective. Hinata's movement suddenly stopped. We have an intruder. Do we need to care? Sasuke said, displeased at the interruption. His clothes matched the description of akatsuki regalia, Hinata said, already moving to the side for when Sasuke would jump into action. She was right. With a casual speed she could never match, Sasuke grabbed his sword and was at the door. Stay here and don't get involved, Sasuke told her. He never wanted Hinata to go anywhere near an opponent like this. Following Hinata's directions, he found the masked man in one of Orochimaru's laboratories, going over some of his research notes. Oh, I didn't think anybody but Orochimaru to be brave enough to face me, the masked man said. He turned around and puffed up his chest. I happen to be part of the Akatsuki, you know. We are the most dangerous criminals in all the land. If you are wise, you'll turn around and forget you ever... We'll talk after I've restrained you, Sasuke interrupted, pointing and launching a Chidori spear. Tobi jumped far to the side, and the beam of light cut into some tanks filled with organs. Ah, that actually looked really dangerous. Maybe we should... Again he was interrupted as the same spear of lightning cut through the room like butter, and he was forced to dodge again. At this point, Tobi promptly fled, and Sasuke gave chase. He can run fast, I'll give him that, he thought. He didn't seem to know the network of hallways that well though, as he soon reached a room that had only one way in and no other way out. There is nowhere to run, Sasuke thought with a grin. Tobi next jumped on a nearby desk and pressed his hands together. Not in any kind of hand sign, but like someone who was about to dive into a swimming pool. Whee! He yelled, and he dived towards a wall and actually disappeared into it. Sasuke stood still for a moment, wondering what had just happened, when the enemy next flew out of the floor like a fish, still mimicking a diver. He came from right behind Sasuke and smacked him over the head with the back of his foot as he flew by. If he had more control over that might have gone a lot worse for me, Sasuke thought. An unseen attack to the back of the head was very dangerous, but the masked man's attack had been very sloppy and almost looked accidental. Contrary to Sasuke's belief, the masked man, aka Obito, could control his pseudo-teleporting perfectly. But he was just playing around in the guise of Tobi to see what Itachi's brother was made out of. So far, he was judging Sasuke to be the lesser of the two. Sasuke jumped into the air and began launching fireballs at the enemy. Tobi continued to dive in and out of the ground, and their fight was beginning to look like a very strange version of whack-a-mole. Sasuke, in frustration at his inability to catch his target, began to fill the room with ninja wires. Tobi's seemingly uncontrolled movements would ensure he'd get stuck in one. Nope, not dealing with that, Tobi said, with only part of his body sticking out of the ground as he saw the veritable spiderwebs of ninja wires. Next, he just ran out of the room, and Sasuke again gave chase. Losing patience, Sasuke used his curse mark to surpass what Obito was pretending was his top speed. Sasuke reached out a hand and managed to grab Tobi's Akatsuki robes, only for Tobi to slip out of those ropes to break free. Sasuke tossed the cloak aside and again reached out and managed to grab Tobi's sweater, only for him to slip out of that as well, leaving him with just his undershirt. Sasuke would have continued to do this, but he really didn't want to see this man naked, and he had a strange feeling that that's where this was going. He coated his hands with Chidori, intending to cut the annoying man's legs off. Tobi looked behind him, yelped, and sped up. Sasori! Help! He screamed, and crashed through a wall so they were outside. Tobi made his way to where Orochimaru and Sasori were fighting and then just seemed to vanish. Sasuke couldn't find him anywhere. And for just a moment he regretted not telling Hinata to follow. She'd be able to find him. This, of course, left Sasuke with the Orochimaru and Sasori clash to be the focus of his attention. He paused to observe the fight for a while. While there were lots of broken puppets scattered all over, the fact that Sasori was still fighting at all proved that Orochimaru was having trouble. Usually he dealt with any opponents much sooner. Orochimaru had two things going against him here. The first was that he still couldn't use regular jutsu. His hands were still sealed in the Reaper. The second was Sasori's poison. Yes, Orochimaru had made his body immune to most poisons. But there were normal poisons, and then there were Sasori's poisons, which were just kind of in a league of their own. I'll say that Orochimaru has a slight resistance to Sasori's poisons, so instead of dying in seconds, he died in a minute, maybe. And keep in mind that Sasori isn't equipped specifically to take down a Jinchuriki here, as he was in the Gaara arc, with poisons with delayed effect so he could capture someone whole. Now he's just using the most lethal stuff he has. I mean, you can't convince me that the best poison that Sasori has is that stuff that kills someone in 3 days. There are real-world poisons that are way more effective. By using his own body replacement technique right after being poisoned, Orochimaru can avoid dying immediately. But such a 100% body regeneration technique takes some chakra, and Sasuke sees all this with his Sharingan. He also spots the chakra strings that Sasori is using, and notices that he seems perfectly capable of using even the destroyed puppets as weapons. Such sneaky attacks wouldn't work on Sasuke, thanks to his dojutsu, but it might on Orochimaru. That said, Orochimaru was just a whole lot stronger and faster than Sasori, so there was that. Sasori was constantly retreating, but that didn't mean he was losing. The Puppet Master was already using his own body as a weapon, in conjunction with the third Kazekage, and so was constantly attacking even as he was backing away to keep distance. Then, Sasuke decided to jump in and cut off Sasori's retreat. The Puppet Master survived the initial Chidori Senbon by blocking with the Iron Sand. This event would also demonstrate that Lightning Chakra can disrupt the magnet release, which makes sense if you consider physics, but not so much if you consider that magnet release is a combination of wind and lightning chakra. There is no earth there to justify it being weak to lightning, like it was with the explosion release. But with Shiki and Boruto we see that lightning, if powerful enough, can at least disrupt it, so there you go. Sasuke smirked condescendingly at Orochimaru and met his eyes. "Needs any help, master?" Orochimaru frowned, a sure sign that he wasn't having fun with this fight. "One hit from him and you're dead." "Won't be a problem," Sasuke said, his smirk growing a little sharper. He was saying that he'd have no problem avoiding hits, unlike Orochimaru. Sasori tried to flee at this point, using the Iron Sand to fly away. This was getting a bit too hot for him. He felt he had a fair shot against Orochimaru one-on-one, but not with Sasuke aiding him. Sasuke, with his Hawk summons, can fly though and doesn't just let him go. And Orochimaru's snakes can extend a very long distance, and as mentioned, Orochimaru is faster than Sasori. Orochimaru extends his body until his torso is high over the tree trunks, dodging between and cutting down puppets with his sword Kusuragi, even as Sasuke is moving to always keep Sasori between the two of them, pelting him with lightning jutsus all the while. There is no need for any special grand plan. Sasuke and Orochimaru simply overwhelmed Sasori. Though Sasori was confused when one of his puppets actually managed to nick Orochimaru, and he didn't immediately replace his body, but he was too pressured to give it much thought. Though he couldn't win the fight, Sasori tries one last thing to get away. In one of the puppets he sends away, he houses his real core. From that moment on, Sasori's previous body briefly has to go on autopilot, using a small bit of his chakra. That's not something that would hold up to any kind of close scrutiny, but within less than a second that body got caught up by Orochimaru's sword regardless. All of this was done under the cover of poison gas to try and stop Sasuke to notice him with his Sharingan. From this position, Sasori made it seem like all puppets stopped moving, as if he had died. He could still send out chakra strings to command his arsenal, but he knew the Sharingan would give him away. It was essential that this new puppet body didn't show any chakra outside of its own shell. When the puppet that housed him landed, he again discarded it in favor of an even smaller container. Nothing but a tube on legs, like a spider almost, carefully trying to scurry away without being seen. Meanwhile, Orochimaru was inspecting Sasori's fake body and quickly coming to the right conclusion. I don't think this is him. Orochimaru made a step forward but found that walking took more effort than it should. Poison! But I made sure to avoid all hits in that last encounter, he thought. Even now he had trouble registering it. Almost like every time his mind gravitated to the idea of being poisoned, there was a kind of haze. Then he suddenly realized what happened. He disrupted his own chakra network and suddenly he was fully aware of the poison coursing through him. Having noticed it so late, it had completely run through his entire bloodstream. It was too late for a replacement. Sasori must have used the genjutsu, Orochimaru said. Bring me Kabuto. Sasuke didn't move. His expression was that of a barely held back smile. Orochimaru felt a chill and it had nothing to do with the deadly poison. It wasn't Sasori, was it? He said. Back when he exchanged glances with me when he first arrived, his Sharingan. He made it so I wouldn't know when I was hit. Sasuke shrugged. I've learned all you had to teach. This seemed like too good of an opportunity to miss. Sasori's poisons were unrivaled, and Orochimaru knew his current body would stop functioning in a matter of seconds. He turned into the white snake, screaming, Sasuke! And tried to take his body right then and there. And so we get the confrontation between Sasuke and Orochimaru a bit sooner. A few months sooner if I get my timeline correctly. But with Sasori's poison, he's just about as weak if not weaker than he was back then. I'm not going to go over it in detail since it happens very similar to canon. Sasuke could have just fled and let Sasori's poison do its thing. But he didn't do that in the canon storyline, and Orochimaru was dying there as well. A bit more slowly, but it was happening. And Sasuke still chose to do the dangerous thing and confront him. And there are lines in the fight that shows that Sasuke was deliberately baiting Orochimaru into trying the ritual, so Sasuke could absorb his chakra. Just one more edge to maybe let him defeat his brother. So yeah, long story short, Orochimaru gets absorbed by Sasuke. Sasori, meanwhile, has scurried out of sight, having made good use of the internal division of his enemies to get away and hide. Then, just when he was sure he had gotten away, a woman's voice cried out, He's over there! And within seconds Sasuke was there, and had pierced the tiny puppet with his sword. The thing had no weapons to defend itself. Its only purpose was as a last-ditch effort to hide and escape. Sasuke pried open the puppet and pulled out Sasori's core. He gave the thing an evil smile. Now, you're going to tell me everything you know about Itachi. He sealed the organic core away for interrogation later, and then turned to Hinata. I thought I told you to stay away. And I told you I wouldn't leave until your quest was done. I'll try to stay out of the way, but I will be there to witness how your tale ends, one way or another, Hinata said. I was worried, you know. I could see your chakra fighting against Orochimaru's. I wasn't sure whose would win. That was reckless. Every step of my journey, Sasuke said with another shrug. You couldn't beat someone like Itachi by playing it safe. Every possible advantage had to be taken. You should know, I've killed Kabuto. I didn't want any loose ends. Kabuto would be more than a match for Hinata under more circumstances, but his artificial legs got sabotaged by Sasori. Hinata saw that he was basically helpless and had taken the opportunity. I don't care about that bootlicker, Sasuke said. Let's return to base. It would be abandoned soon, but it was still somewhere where they could interrogate their prisoner in peace. One more thing. The man with the mask. I saw that he had a Sharingan. Sasuke looked up sharply. Like a Kashi? Hinata shook her head. I think he was born with it. His chakra and the way it naturally flowed with and through the eye was closer to your likeness than Kakashi's. Another Uchiha. I'm working for the enemy. Sasuke thought. Could be somebody's Bible, I guess. Hinata continued to tell him what she could about the masked man, including that his technique genuinely allowed him to teleport. One problem at a time. First Itachi, then he glanced at Hinata. Then I guess we shall see. Meanwhile, on a tree some distance away, out of range of Hinata's Bakugan, stood Tobi. He had a handkerchief out and was minding sniffing his nose, despite having a mask on. He held up his hands and waved with the handkerchief. Bye, Sasori, sir! I did not know him long, but I will never forget him. We shall raise a toast in his honor! Yes, yes we will. Even amidst everything that was happening, Naruko kept up with challenging the Kyuubi to fights on a near weekly basis. Naruko still considered her greatest priority to find a way to access and keep Sage Mode active for as long as possible. But she also doubted that every enemy she'd ever faced would continue to be so completely outclassed by the form when she didn't continue to train it religiously. The Kyuubi was the only opponent available that didn't just instantly lose to it. The same conditions of the first fight applied. If the Kyuubi managed to kill her, he wasn't to hurt anyone else on his way out. In those fights, the most important thing for Naruko was always to keep her retreat secure, by not letting the Kyuubi get between her and the exit of the cage. This wasn't always possible, of course, and every time it wasn't, she risked dying. As it was now. Naruko had tried to prevent it by throwing a Russian shuriken in the fox's path, but he had elected to accept the damage of the attack if it meant cutting off her retreat. So now she stood facing the Ninetales, his paws positioned for easy movement sideways to prevent her from slipping past him towards safety. Naruko chose to attack him head-on. Normally a fool's errand, but the fox was injured from her previous attack, but his regenerative abilities meant that the advantage wouldn't last for very long. He swiped at her with his claws and she caught the blow and allowed her aura of wind chakra to cut at him. Her muscles screamed in protest for trying to match the Kyuubi's strength for strength. A tall order, even in Sage Mode. But once she endured the initial clash, the continuous cuts from the wind chakra lessened the pressure the Kyuubi could bring to bear. Above her, the Kyuubi was loading up a tail beast bomb that he seemed intent on firing at her at near point-blank range. It would hurt him as well if it exploded that close to him, but it would hurt her a lot more. Her hair, which she had sent to grab the bars of the cage behind the Kyuubi in order to pull her in, swiftly diverted its path to something more urgent. It got under the Kyuubi's chin and pulled upwards, lifting up the fox's face just as he fired his attack. From that position, her hair managed to wrap itself entirely around the Kyuubi's neck, and soon Naruko found herself actually wrestling with the Kyuubi, trying to push him out of her way so she could get out of the cage. His tail beat at her back, and her hair pulled itself tighter and tighter around the Kyuubi's neck, cutting into it. Within a few seconds, the Kyuubi's attacks grew weaker as the assault on his neck grew too much. It seemed that in her efforts to get away, she might have actually achieved her first win against him. When the Kyuubi fell, she swiftly made her escape, pausing only long enough to make sure he wasn't fatally injured. Guess I'm finally starting to become your equal, huh? Naruko said after they had both recovered enough to speak.
Don't kid yourself, human. These are hardly fair fights.
Naruko had to admit that was true, with the easy method of retreat that she had behind the cage. But still, she found herself making steady progress. Still, I think I deserve a small reward for this achievement, don't you think? The Kyuubi scoffed.
Respect is something you earned from me a while ago,
he said to Naruko's visible surprise.
That doesn't mean that you and I aren't enemies. That cannot change for so long as you are my jailer.
Even enemies can show respect.
As I just said, I promise nothing. What do you want?
If Kurama were to guess, he'd think she'd ask after his true name. She'd mentioned that curiosity concerning that a few times. At this point he might be willing to give it. But that wasn't it. Tell me about Ninshu and the Sage of the Six Paths.
Why do you wish to know?
You said something a while back, that we humans took your father's teachings of Ninshu and perverted it. I looked up what Ninshu means, and all I've been able to find is that it's an old religion that supposedly came directly from the sage himself.
There is no supposed about it. It's a technique my father hoped would bring peace to your race. Instead, it did the opposite.
Yes, there is the crux of it. I'm looking for anything that might help me help others. Especially ways to make this world less, well, what it currently is. Looking at what those before me tried to do, especially one like the Sage, might help me.
Don't bother. The sage failed, and if he couldn't do it, then you stand no chance either.
Though the QB knew that might be twisting the truth a bit. There had been a long period of peace while the sage walked the earth. It was only after he stepped down in favor of his sons that things started to fall apart. I'm desperate for anything that might help, Naruko pleaded. Even a failed attempt to make things better was something she could learn from.
I'll tell you, but it won't do you any good,
the QB said. Hagoromo would never forgive him if he didn't share his teachings to someone who was specifically asking for it.
Have you ever heard the saying that two high-level shinobi could read each other's thoughts and intentions, simply through an exchange of blows?
Naruko nodded.
That's a remnant of Ninshu, the precursor skill to ninjutsu. It is meant as a way for people to connect each other's spiritual energies. It allows humans, and anyone really, to know and understand each other in a way that would otherwise take decades.
Connecting, Naruko mused. Is it like when me and Sakura's chakras merged to form our BFF Rasengan? The QB had to consider it.
If you weaponize it, it stops being Ninshu. But that ridiculously named technique would be impossible to perform if you two already weren't connected on some level.
If me and Sakura already know how to do it on some level, then can I practice the technique with her? She asked. The thought of getting even closer to Sakura caused her heart to skip a beat.
No. Ninshu is meant to promote understanding between strangers. You and Sakura are already in harmony. There'd be no point.
Then how do I learn it then? The QB again took a long time to consider.
You can practice it with me. I'll try to teach it to you if you wish.
Naruko looked at him suspiciously, no doubt suspecting that this was another one of his attempts to get her killed. To Kurama, that just proved that he was the perfect one to try and teach her this. And he actually wasn't planning on abusing this opportunity to kill her. The memory of his father was one of the few things he held sacred, and this technique was closely linked to it. The QB closed one of his paws into a fist and held it close to the bars of the cage.
Touch my paw with a closed fist, and close your eyes.
What, like a fist bump? Naruko asked, amused. Kurama gritted his teeth.
Yes, like a fist bump. Now do as I say.
Naruko still hesitated for a moment, but then took a deep breath and decided to trust the one that was trying to kill her. Thank you, and the sentence stuttered to a stop. Kurama saw that at that moment she wanted to speak his name, but realized she still didn't know it.
If you can guess my name without me having to tell it to you, then you may consider yourself a true practitioner of Ninshu,
he said. And so began Naruko's forays into the oldest form of chakra usage that was ever invented by man. That particular meeting with the QB happened the very next night after they had defected from the Leaf Village. Sakura's parents left at the break of dawn. At Kakashi's recommendation, they didn't tell them where they'd be planning to hide. What they didn't know, they couldn't be forced into revealing. After that, the group had to decide where to go next. It's simple. The goal is to be true heroes. And that means we need to go where people are likely to be in trouble. That means going where the fighting is thickest, Naruko said. So Danzo will get his wish after all. We'll be going to the front lines, Sakura said with a wry smile. Soon, yes. If it's alright with all of you, I'd like to visit the capital first. A capital? Shizune questioned. Won't there be a warrant out on our heads? I doubt many will have the strength to take on our group, but that's no reason to go looking for a fight. I agree, but I heard that Asuma is there. I'm not saying I want him to join us, but... Well, actually, I would love for him to join us, but mostly I just want to see him, and ask for his counsel. Naruko had a downcast expression as she said it. Naruko wasn't exactly sure what she hoped he'd say. She was pretty sure he wouldn't judge her for her choices. Maybe she just liked to get some validation from the closest thing she had left to a father figure, now that Jiraiya was gone. Sakura and Kiba also wanted to see him again, so the choice was easily made. If you're trying to see him discreetly, perhaps it would be better if I headed in first, Kakashi offered once they came close. At the very least, Naruko should stay behind. But if there's fighting, you'll need me. Maybe, but if you go, there will almost certainly be fighting. Not to put too fine a point on it, but sneaking around isn't exactly your specialty. Naruko wasn't happy about it, but knew Kakashi wasn't exactly wrong. She wasn't terrible at sneaking, but everybody here was simply better. So she stayed behind. Sakura offered to stay as well, but Naruko told her she'd be fine. Turned out he needn't have bothered. Within a few minutes they were back with Asuma in tow. Are they expecting you back soon? Naruko asked after running up and hugging him. Yes, they are. And you're coming with me, Asuma said. If it wasn't for the tone of his voice and the smile on his face, Naruko would have thought he was arresting her. Naruko looked at the rest of their party. You did explain that we're criminals now, right? Any missing ninja was considered a criminal by default. He explained everything, and I'm sure the daimyo would want to meet you. Naruko still looked dubious. We're not going to try to throw you in jail, or turn you over to Konoha. Just trust me on this. Well, the news might not have reached this place yet, Naruko thought. I've never dealt with nobility. I don't know how to behave. Just be respectful. They'll want to meet you, trust me. She did trust him, so that was that. They didn't hide and just strolled in and were escorted to the palace with a detachment of guards. Some of those were even wearing the Konoha headbands. Since they didn't glare at them, Naruko again assumed that the news hadn't reached them yet. Just don't accept any offers of arranged marriages, Asuma joked on the way. Is that likely? Sakura asked. More so for Naruko. She's not strictly speaking nobility, but being the child of a Kage does carry a certain amount of prestige. Besides, assassins are a danger for royalty even under normal circumstances, which these are not. What better way to make sure your family is safe than having you as their matriarch? Well, I've got more important stuff to do than being queen, Naruko said. Yes, but don't let them hear you say that. They don't like to be reminded that there is anything that's more important than them. The Fire Daimyo turned out to be friendly enough and invited them to dinner. Naruko planned to dance around the subject of her defection from Konoha, but Asuma straight up told him. Truly marvelous, the daimyo said, which threw Naruko for a loop. Someone else, an advisor of the daimyo as well as another one of the ninja guardians as Naruko understood it, asked after her reasons and Naruko told them. I see why you brought her here, Asuma. The man, let's call him Ichiro, he's an OC since we don't have any canon members of the ninja guardians that are active at this time. The interests of Konoha and the Fire Daimyo aren't as united as they once were, Asuma explained at her confused look. We've caught several of what we assumed to be spies for the Hokage, or at least that's what we assumed them to be, as we couldn't interrogate them due to the seal on their tongues. Regardless, we fear his intentions towards Fire Country's secular government to be less than honorable. Indeed. I've commanded him to stop this escalation of hostilities with the other nations several times now. Yet he persists. The Hokage is supposed to follow my directions. The daimyo actually pouted. I'd order his abdication, but I doubt that would stick without a civil war, which we'd lose. Naruko knew that the Hidden Villages were a country's primary military, so if it did come to a civil war, she doubted it would go well for the daimyo. The daimyo's expression brightened. But with you at our side, maybe that's no longer true. It is tempting, Naruko said. But I have no intention of fighting against Konoha. I've got friends there. I left, but I bared no enmity. She looked at the rest of her group, and they seemed to agree with her. We might be able to remove the Hokage, and be able to put an end to the 4th Great Ninja War afterwards, Ichiro said. Hence why it's tempting, Naruko said. Even if they succeeded, and that would only happen over the corpses of her former comrades, what would happen then? Danzo hadn't been entirely wrong when he said the previous status quo, with the spies, the scheming and the posturing, wasn't something to be strived for. Maybe she was being foolish, but Naruko hoped for more. Hoped it was possible to better the world by something other than outright destroying one's enemies. I don't care who rules what, Naruko said, and Asuma cringed at her bluntness. All I know is that innocent people will be caught up in this conflict, and that's where my focus needs to be. They might be better served by stopping the war in its entirety, Kakashi chimed in. Yes, but that will take time. I know that people are in danger now. Everyone looked dubious at her reasoning. All but Sakura. I know what you're all thinking, that we should focus on the greater good. But that's also exactly what Lord Danzo is doing. I, for one, am sick of that. Naruko shot a grateful look at Sakura. Danzo seeks to bring peace to the world by destroying all of his enemies. If I help start a civil war to oust Danzo, then I'm no different, Naruko said, and again looked to her companions. But I understand if some of you disagree. If you want to stay here and join this faction, I won't stop you. Every single one replied in the negative. Asuma looked chagrined. I'm really sorry about this. No, I understand. I am disappointed, but I understand, the daimyo said. You really are Jiraiya's student. You knew him? Not well, but I did admire him. He was my first choice for 5th Hokage. If he had accepted, so much could have been different. He sighed. I was saddened to hear of his death. But even if you won't join me outright, I hope you'll still enter my service. I don't understand. Your goal of helping the innocents touched by the war is a noble one, and one I'd be happy to support. I'd be glad to have you do it in my name. Is that what I'd have you do if I could outright command you? What is better than nothing? As I understand it, you'd be free to pursue your own interests, so nothing would change for you. But for us it would be beneficial to have your name attached to us. We'd effectively absolve you of the crime of desertion, and in so doing maybe encourage others to follow. It would be another hit to the Hokage's control of Konoha's ninjas, Ichiro said, and the daimyo nodded along. And being seen supporting free humanitarian aid is always a good thing. They want to take credit for our efforts, Naruko thought. Would you actually help us? Nothing beyond declaring that you're not a missing ninja, the daimyo said with slightly narrowed eyes. Don't get ahead of yourself, girl. You'll have my official sanction. But if you want more aid from me, I'd require a more significant show of loyalty in turn. Even this much, not being considered a missing ninja, was a boon, Naruko thought. People tended to mistrust rogue ninjas. A part of her felt disappointed, as there was a part of her that hoped to be completely alone with her friends against the world. But that was pride talking. Helping people was what was important, and she suspected that this would help. Also, not being at complete odds with at least one part of the government meant that they might be able to return to peaceful lives someday. No, I'm grateful for even this much, Naruko said, and bowed her head in respect. The rest of the dinner was just small talk. They did ask after Naruko's group's overall plans, and while Naruko answered as best she could, the truth was that her plans were still very vague things. Later, Asuma told her a bit more about what had just transpired, giving her details and motivations that had flown over her head. First of all, the daimyo sanctioning Naruko's rogue escapades was a way for the whole of Fire Country to at least pretend that they hadn't completely lost control over their Jinchuriki. Second, she learned just how precarious the daimyo's position was right now. With the war, the capital was a valuable target for foreign invasion, and that meant that Konoha had to protect it. So there was a strong Lee Village presence in the city. But the problem was that the daimyo didn't trust the Lee Village at the moment, so his city was filled with ninjas of suspected dubious intentions towards him. Now, Naruko understood why Asuma had agreed to come here. The daimyo had all but begged him to return, as he was desperate for ninjas not in Danzo's pocket. If you ask me, I think the daimyo is actually hoping that we'll lose the 4th Great Ninja War, Asuma also told her. While we might lose some territory and wealth, it would give him the opportunity to more easily oust Danzo. No leader of a nation can afford to have a military that doesn't have his best interests in mind. Asuma gave a despondent shake of his head. It's strange. Several years ago there was a movement among the Ninja Guardians to do away with the Ninja Village system and restore full power to the daimyo. At the time the daimyo rejected the idea, but now I'm wondering if the Fire Lord is regretting that choice. Side note, I'm referring to Kazuma, the villain from the Ninja Guardians filler arc. It kinda fits the situation, so I'm rolling with it. Kazuma's goal was as Asuma just said, but he also wanted to expand Fire Country, and believed it would only be safe once that flag flew from every corner of the world. Considering how close his ideals align with Danzo's current goals, I'm saying he's probably just a regular Leaf Shinobi at this point. I know you want to stay out of this, Naruko, but the daimyo is something of a friend of mine. If it comes down to it, I ask that you help me defend him. His life, if not his position. Whatever else she may think, Naruko couldn't refuse such a request from her old mentor. Her goal is to protect those who can't protect themselves. She knew it was an overly simplistic and perhaps naive ideal, but she had chosen to try and live by it. So yes, we'll help. I'll leave a way to contact me here. And that was that. I felt I had to give a bit of context in what is happening with the politics of Fire Country, and what Asuma is currently doing. Not yet sure how relevant it's going to be. High-minded politics kind of has to take a back seat when there are several superpowered megalomaniacs running about, doing their thing. I hope it was at least vaguely interesting. Moving on. The next day they headed out again towards the lands of Waterfall, and within a few days they snuck their way across the border. While Naruko tended to be a jump in head first and think of a plan later kind of gal, but now she had at least the beginnings of a plan. That plan involved contacting Shibuki, the leader of the hidden Waterfall village, as well as the local feudal lords, if only so they could state their intentions. While she wouldn't fight their battles for them, as the goal was to remain as neutral as possible, they could only approve of their group's goal of protecting their people, and so offered aid in the form of information. Information like which towns and regular villages had already been destroyed in the crossfire, where to find their refugees, which places were currently still at high risk. That aid did come with the caveat of accepting several local soldiers and ninjas into their ranks as open spies. If no reports came, the leaders of the small nation would know they'd been betrayed. Naruko didn't mind those spies. She had nothing to hide. In the coming weeks, Sakura, for once, became the undisputed most valuable member of their group. Naruko was a warrior trained for destruction, which at best could be used to protect someone. Sakura was a healer, and really no further explanation was needed. Even Shizune contributed more to the vague goal of helping everyone they could. Hiba, Akamaru, Kakashi and their entire dog pack made themselves useful by finding those that were injured. Like a man that had been trapped under a falling building in a village that had been destroyed and abandoned recently. A caravan of travelers who had been assaulted by bandits who were taking advantage of the chaos. As for Naruko, she was running herself ragged by trying to police the entire vulnerable nation by herself. She stretched her shadow clones to the limit so she could be in as many places as possible, becoming a true one-woman army. She made it clear to the invaders, whether they be from the stone, cloud or even leaf, that they'd better treat the locals with respect or they'd answer to her. As long as they didn't inconvenience the locals, she'd stay out of their way. Usually, in the event of a fight, even a shadow clone was enough to get the message across. If they got past that, it would then usually be less than an hour before the real Naruko was able to race to their position, and that was that. Naruko was able to keep up his pace for about a week before she collapsed. Not from physical exhaustion, but mental. By the end, she felt like she was walking through a dream and her vision blurred on and off. When Sakura examined her, it looked as if Naruko had slept for over a month. From there, it didn't take long to figure out what had happened. A user of the Shadow Clones retained the memories of the clones after they expired. A great advantage under most circumstances, but it clearly also had its detriments. If all the clones were set to a similar task, or part of a close-knit unit, the memories tended to blur together. But if you were trying to use the Shadow Clones to do the work of a whole army, setting them far and wide, then the memories tended to pile up. And those accumulated experiences needed a matching amount of sleep for the brain to properly process. Quick aside, this headcanon interpretation of the Shadow Clones is as close as I can come to explaining canon Naruto's behavior in Boruto. And yes, I do realize it's probably just a plot hole. Moving on. Naruko collapsing from exhaustion took Sakura away from her other duties, as nothing was more important to her than nursing Naruko back to health. In a manner similar to when Sakura herself had been catatonic after being tortured by Itachi, she now held her friend while she slept, holding Naruko's head close to her chest as Sakura worked her magic. While Tsunade had still been the better overall medic by far, the one area in which Sakura had surpassed her old mentor was in healing the mind, as that was where her two specialties overlapped. Thanks to Sakura's help, Naruko was able to get several weeks worth of sleep back in only a single night. Naruko would later say that it was the best night's rest she had ever had, accompanied by the nicest dreams. She dreamt that she was 8 years old again, and was snuggling with her two friends at one of their sleepovers. Sakura didn't tell her how close the dream had been to reality. "I should have spotted that you were pushing yourself too hard," Sakura said. "And you should have known better." "We've all been pushing ourselves hard," Naruko retorted. "How many people do you have to examine and look after on a daily basis? I didn't want to bother you. And I needed to be everywhere at the same time. There was no other option. They were simply too few to protect so many." After some more arguing, Sakura was able to extract a promise from Naruko not to try that again. She'd be a lot less help to people if she allowed herself to burn out. Thankfully, by now the people of Waterfall were well convinced of their good intentions. The hidden Waterfall village used its own ninjas as scouts and called on Naruko only whenever needed. There was some arguing over the "when needed" part, as Naruko didn't just want to expel every foreign ninja, nor did she prevent the other nations from setting up bases of operations here, so long as no innocents were caught up in the crossfire. She wasn't here to defend the sovereignty of the small nations. She was here as a neutral party trying to make the world a little less horrible. That earned her some nasty looks, but eventually they learned in what situations they could expect aid from Naruko and her group. Again, as an aside, Shibuki told Naruko that she was doing something similar to the job that would have been expected of Fu if she'd still been alive. They talked about her disappearance and the request for aid that went unanswered. Sadly, this is as close as Naruko was ever going to come to figuring out that Danzo intentionally ignored the letter. There was no proof of anything, and even if there were, They were too busy to go play detective. The living needed them more than food did. Using her budding ability in Ninshu, Naruko was able to get an impression of the thoughts of those she clashed with. Most didn't really want to be doing this, and some were grateful at the excuse that Naruko presented. As ninjas, they were conditioned to take any and all advantages in the name of completing their mission, regardless of morality or honor. Yet even amidst those hardened agents, they tended to prefer avoiding innocent casualties. But their own sense of duty didn't allow them to consider them if it lowered the success chance of their mission. But with Naruko there, the risks of not minding the locals was no longer worth it from a purely pragmatic point of view, which was the only point of view that some of them knew. Naruko's group's goal of saving as many as they could also wasn't just limited to innocent civilians. Ninjas that had gotten injured on the field of battle, no matter their allegiance, were taken in and given a chance to recover until they could return home or go wherever they wished to go. More than once, a rescued ninja's comrades tried to attack them to reclaim their comrades who they assumed had been taken captive. So far they had been able to resolve those misunderstandings without anyone getting hurt. While most did indeed return to their former duties after they recovered, they did get a handful of people who chose to join them instead, once they learned of what they were doing. Again, Naruko used her budding Ninshu talent to discover that while they were fascinated by what this new group was trying to do here, most defectors still had loyalty to their own village. Logically, Naruko deduced that meant they were probably spying. Naruko flat out told them that they were allowed to send whatever letters back home they wanted, as there was nothing they did here that she didn't want others to know about. That cavalier, so very un-ninja-like behavior when it came to information earned her several baffled looks that Naruko secretly delighted in. Not everyone was okay with that policy though. By doing this, you are making it even more easy for any of the major powers to harm us, Kakashi said. I know. I'm hoping they won't want to harm us. So far, we've only been a minor inconvenience to people. You are wrong, Kakashi told her bluntly. If people try to defect to you, that makes you a threat. They are free to come here and try to convince them to return. Nobody is here against their will, Naruko said, knowing that didn't actually solve the problem of the powers that be wishing them ill. It's a risk, I know. Trusting someone you don't know always is. But if we are to have any hope of changing what it means to be a shinobi, this is what needs to happen. I've seen the effects that it has on some. Simple trust, without any caveats. Not out of naivete, but knowing full well the risk we take. It makes them want to live up to that trust. That won't work for everyone, Kakashi said. It would only take a few to ruin us. There are good reasons why we ninjas don't trust easily. Naruko wouldn't be swayed on this though. To her, the effect she saw it having on some people's hearts was too valuable to give up. And about Naruko and her use of Ninshu. If there is any skill in this whole setting that being a reincarnation of Ashura would help her to master, it is this one. Hence why she's picking it up so quickly. Aside from those handful that joined them after being saved from the battlefield, they also got several volunteers in the form of missing ninja who wanted to be part of something both great and nobler than what they were used to. People that had been disillusioned with the whole ninja system, or those that just wanted a second chance, or even those who only defected from their village recently and just heard about them. Of that latter group, most were from Konoha, as there were many who still held on to the more idealistic view of the shinobi and the will of fire that Hiruzen had tried to preach, and they saw following Naruko as a better alternative to following Danzo. That Naruko had the blessing of the fire daimyo also aided in this, as that meant they could do this without being considered criminals. Another factor that aided that development was that Danzo himself had spread the news of Naruko's parentage just after she left for a mission to kill Gaara, meaning just before she defected. Danzo had attempted to have Naruko be seen as one of Konoha's new champions, to replace the one they lost 15 years ago, and that was now backfiring on him. After she defected, Danzo had tried to smear her reputation to undo what he'd started, but the damage was done. After only a month, Naruko's group was big enough to spread their operations to other smaller nations that were also being touched by the war, like the lands of grass, rivers, rice, and sound. By now the warring ninja in the land of Waterfall had learned how to behave, and they could only hope that it would stick even after Naruko and Kakashi, their biggest muscles, weren't personally in the country anymore. And as to me telling you about all this instead of showing it in much more detail, I am sorry. Getting into detail would require introducing a lot of original characters, which is something I am very hesitant about doing. Hence why I'm giving you the summarized version of what is going on. This is essentially a small time skip. Also, as a fun side note, I do think Naruko would have at least one run-in with Killer B. They didn't fight, they just talked, while Naruko talked and B rapped. B told her to bump fists with him and instantly decides she's cool and that she should keep being cool. Yo. Now, of course, by now their new group had been given a name. Neither Naruko nor any of their group had made an effort to name their faction, so that had been left to those they fought for and those they fought against. Those that they fought for named them pure idealistic heroes. Those that they fought against named them naive idealistic fools. It had eventually settled on simply ideal seekers, which I'm very poorly translating to Rizo no Tankyu Sha. Meanwhile, in the hidden rain village, Nagato, in the guise of pain, was going over the reports of this Rizo no Tankyu Sha. Just like everyone else, he had his own spies in that organization. Simple rank and file rain ninja. The fact that the leader of this new organization was a Kyuubi Jinchuriki was enough for it to warrant his attention. But there was more to it than that. Nagato hadn't been exactly happy when he learned that Naruko Uzumaki had left the Leaf Village. It didn't matter that she should be easier to capture now. If he decided to go after her, he would catch her, and it didn't matter where she'd be or who would stand in his way. All would fall before him. So Leaf or Rogue Ninja, it made no matter. But with her defection, Nagato lost his excuse to attack the Leaf Village itself. He still remembered how Leaf Ninjas had cut down his parents, and still harbored a grudge. But that grudge alone wasn't enough for him to act. He considered himself above such petty motivations. He wouldn't act unless there was some greater purpose behind it. Then he learned what the Kyuubi Jinchuriki was trying to do, and it left him more conflicted than he had been in a long time. Nagato had grown up in a small nation that had been taken advantage of by their more powerful neighbors in the Second Great Ninja War. It was all the horror and cruelty he'd seen that made him into the man he was now. What drove him to seek peace no matter what the cost. And now it seemed that one of their targets, those who needed to be sacrificed if their plan was to succeed, had taken it upon herself to try and protect those smaller nations in a way nobody had ever done before. Granted, their goal didn't seem to be peace in the strictest sense, but through their actions, this war was turning into something unrecognizable. Nagato wasn't sure of where that left him. The plan had so far still proceeded as normal, and by now only the 8 and 9 tails remained free. Many in the Akatsuki, the masked man chief among them, asked him what was taking so long. Naruko Uzumaki was out in the open and vulnerable. They could strike at her whenever they wished. Itachi had personally offered to go after the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, but Nagato as Pain had refused. She will fall when I will it. And that was that. Nagato wanted more information. He needed to be certain. Next to the body of Tendo Pain, which was Nagato's primary focus at the moment, a whirlwind of paper began to slowly form into the white silhouette of a woman. Hona, his only remaining friend and the only one in the Akatsuki whom Nagato could trust completely. "You called, my lord?" she said once fully formed. "Yes, I have a task for you." And that's the end of part 36. Nikes out.